Hello, everybody. I am Harry from the Golden Hour Film Podcast, and today it is 12 classic French films that everyone should see. Now, like 99% of the content you will find on this channel, the 12 films I'm discussing today will all be pre 1970. Yeah, we covered Poaching that one time because we're Irish. That's about the only reason. And if we cover anything post 1969, it'll be for good reason, trust me. But with the French films that I'm covering today, I'm also going to limit myself to one film per director because by no means am I a French film connoisseur or anything, but I have seen a fair few, especially pre 1970. So just to kind of make the list as diverse as possible, yeah, I'm going to limit myself to one director per slot pretty much, and there'll be an abundance of honorable mentions throughout the video. So if your favorite doesn't even get mentioned in the honorable mentions, of course, let me know what your favorites are that I did exclude. Of course, if you want to see us do more top 12s, let me know in the comments. If you want us to do a certain genre, director, actor, country, decade, whatever, let us know in the comments and we'll get to working on it, because I have like 3 top 12s or 12 blank films everyone should see that I'm personally working on at the moment anyway. So yeah, we have plenty coming, so the suggestions would be much appreciated, and I'm going to get straight into it and talk about the first one, and it's the oldest film on the list, and that is The Passion of Joan of Arc. Yes, I'm not going to talk about many films on this list. As a matter of fact, this is one of 2 on this list as far as I'm aware anyway that aren't by French directors, but it's inherently French. It is The Passion of Joan of Arc, obviously one of the most famous stories and people in the history of the country of France as is. And yeah, The Passion of Joan of Arc is by Carl Theodor Dreyer, who is one of the most heralded directors of the silent era. It's got one of the most amazing performances. It's actually the first silent film I've ever seen in my life, which is pretty cool. And yeah, for film completionists and stuff, I would say definitely check this out. If you're not big into silent films, I don't know, because it was my first silent film. I don't know if I actually would recommend it as your first silent film. I think ones that we've covered on the podcast, namely The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, are probably easier and better ways to get into silent films, but it's still an amazing silent film nonetheless. Now, going a little bit more recent, the only one from the 1940s, it is La Grande Illusion, or The Grand Illusion. Yeah, it's based in a POW camp in World War II. And yeah, The Grand Illusion we're talking about, this isn't necessarily a spoiler, is that in the year 1939 that the war was nearly over. Because yeah, most certainly wasn't. The film is absolutely packed with amazing performances. I think especially films set in concentration or POW camps, in this case a POW camp, in World War II that were actually made during World War II feel different to the ones that were made after the fact. And La Grande Illusion is no exception. It's very much class-based. It's fascinating how basically we deal with the relationships of different people in these POW camps and how they kind of interact with different people of different classes and different backgrounds. And yeah, it's safe to say Erich von Stroheim plays a fascinating character in this film, because he's technically the villain of the piece, because he is sort of the head of the POW camp that we're in towards the end, but he has so much respect for certain characters and has no respect for other characters, and it's entirely class-based. It's a really interesting take on the sort of POW subgenre, and I would highly recommend it. It's a fascinating World War II film that, yeah, is the second oldest on the list, that being from 1937. And next I'm going to go way more recent to 1967, and we're talking about Playtime, directed by Jacques Tati. It's the only one of his films that I've seen, and I know this is actually a film in a series, so to speak, of it started with Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. Monsieur Hulot is a character played by the same director, Jacques Tati. It's a film it's like unlike anything I've ever seen before. Every frame is so packed, and it's so packed with color, it's so packed with characters, it's so packed with visual gags, to a point where so many frames look like a Where's Wally or Where's Waldo if you're American picture frame. Like, genuinely, there's so much going on in these frames. It's like unlike any film I've ever seen, And it's one of those films a lot of people would say where even if you watched it 5 times, you still miss jokes because of how unbelievably packed each scene is. And yeah, I just think it certainly wasn't what I was expecting when I thought French comedy from the 60s, because it's not necessarily like laugh out loud humor. It's very intelligent. There's one scene in particular that is like so interesting to me because like you really, I suppose if you're French it's probably really obvious. But there's a scene where an American guy who actually is in a different movie on this list as well, funnily enough, talks to the chef and he pulls up the blind of the serving counter and it kind of looks like Napoleon's hat, so he takes a coaster and sticks it to make it look like the button on Napoleon's hat. I just thought that was hilarious. But there's loads of funny little visual gags. There's so many visual gags because it's not necessarily the most dialogue heavy film, but it's genuinely unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. And next on the list, I want to talk about the most recent film that I've actually watched of the lot, and that is, I don't care what you call him, it's the other non-French director. If you call him Jules Dassin or if you call him Julius Dassin, don't really care. Rafifi is a French movie for sure, and yeah, it reminded me a lot of City on Fire from Hong Kong with Chow Yun-fat, and of course Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino's classic. Because yeah, this is a heist movie. If you've seen those other two films, it's a heist movie. Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's a movie that doesn't pull any punches. It gets very dark. The actual heist scene itself is so enthralling because there's no music, there's no dialogue, and it's like 25 minutes, and yet you're just hooked because of all these little ingenious things with like the umbrella and the different safe cracking tools and everything. It's ingenious. The characters themselves are fascinating. It's genuinely one of the best crime films I've seen of the entire year. It's the first time I watched it actually, and it was quite recent. But yeah, Rafifi, if you're into your crime films, I would absolutely say watch Rafifi. It's so good. It's kind of hard to seek out, I found. It took me ages to find somewhere to actually stream it, but I got there in the end, and yeah, absolutely worth the wait. It is a phenomenal film. Next, I'm going to go for one of the more famous classic French film directors. Another film from 1967 from Jean-Pierre Melville, starring the legendary Alain Delon, who is fastly becoming one of my favorite actors of all time. Le Samurai. It is a neo-noir like no other. The guy is so cool. I feel like every film I've seen Alain Delon in, he is just so cool, and Le Samurai is no different. He's got one of my favorite instances of mirroring that I've seen in a long time, where the ending kind of redoes the beginning, but with the context behind it is so much more tense. In the beginning it feels so smooth. Jeff Costello is such a cool guy who you could just never see him doing anything where he like slips up or anything. He just seems to get everything perfectly like according to his plan. And then obviously you get to the ending and we're doing almost an entire rehash of the opening, but there's so much context to it which makes it so tense, and you just fear for Jeff Costello, because even though he's a man of few words, and again, he's a pretty shady character, it's safe to say, you do root for the guy, especially Alain Delon's performance. Again, very few words, but he does so much with his performance nonetheless, where Jeff Costello is such a fascinating character. And yeah, it just makes it's such an interesting window into like 1960s crime in France. Next, I'm going to talk about legitimately one of my favorite films that I'm actually going to talk about in this entire thing, and that's Cleo from 5 to 7, directed by Agnes Varda. And yeah, the lead performance from Corinne Marchand is amazing. It's quite similar to the film Frances Ha. I feel like that would be a really good double feature, where this film really deals with someone who kind of questions. She's a very talented person, but has she done enough with her life? She is integrating with her friends, but she's like, what am I actually doing with my life? It's very retrospective and introspective, and it's just beautiful. It's beautifully directed. Agnes Varda is a phenomenal director, and the film, yeah, it's very French New Wave, but it's probably more accessible than a lot of the other French New Wave films, I would say. And yeah, it's very relatable. For me anyway, I related to this film a lot. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And yeah, if you like Frances Ha, if you like Greta Gerwig's work, or like Noah Baumbach's work, Baumbach or Baumbach, I'm not sure, But if you like any of their work and you want something similar, but older and French, I would definitely say Cleo from 5 to 7 is a phenomenal film for you to watch. I absolutely adore this movie. Yeah, with Jean-Luc Godard, I found it kind of tough to pick what film of his I actually wanted to put on this list, because I have seen a few and I am a fan of Godard. But if this is 12 classic French films that everyone should see, I think maybe Pierre Le Fou is something you should see after the film I'm going to say. Alphaville, I wasn't actually amazed by. I know I wasn't huge on Alphaville. What I was amazed by was Breathless, and I know that's such a basic answer, but like it's Breathless. It's phenomenal. Now, again, similar enough to Rafifi, it's kind of got that 1960s chauvinism, male chauvinism that kind of goes on in the film. But again, it kind of has come up a couple of times in the podcast with like Gone with the Wind and Lifeboat, where, I don't know, personally, I can get into a film even if I don't like the main character, because I can really get into the world that the director builds. And yeah, with the world of Breathless, it's fascinating. Again, it's just a really interesting look into 1960 Paris. It's so cool. What a cool place to be. The dialogue is ridiculously good, and Jean-Paul Belmondo is so good in the lead role as Michel or Laszlo, whatever the fuck you want to call him. Yeah, Breathless is fantastic, and yeah, that ending as well, really interesting ending. Godard, he takes things and he really like heightens them and conceptualizes them, and he maybe does it on a more accessible level with Breathless. He goes batshit crazy with Pierre Le Fou, which I absolutely adore as well. I love that movie. But yeah, I think Breathless is probably the best entry into Godard's work, and Godard is like an essential classic French film director. Like, you gotta watch his stuff if you want to get into classic French films. Therefore, I would definitely recommend Breathless. Next, I'm going to talk about Eyes Without a Face. Yeah, not necessarily a hugely famous director, Georges Franju, but Eyes Without a Face is amazing. It's a French horror film, again from the year 1960, which I will always maintain is like probably the best year in the history of cinema. But I'll probably make a video about that one day, to be honest. Like, I'm obsessed with the year 1960 in cinema. But Eyes Without a Face is so interesting. It's so well directed. For me, the character of Dr. Genessier is such an interesting character, like a guy who basically plays God, even in the case with his own daughter. It's so dark. It gets to some really interesting concepts, it's safe to say. The performance is amazing. He's so cold and like emotionless, and like even in her fleeting moments of happiness throughout the film, no matter how happy his daughter is, he wants the credit for it, which is insane to me. It's so gripping, and yeah, those poor dogs. The poor dogs. Next, I'm going to talk about a film which, if you are into your American movies, which I'm sure most of you are, you will definitely have heard of a film that kind of remakes this, although it is based on a novel. Yes, if you've seen The Talented Mr. Ripley, I maintain that Plein Soleil, or Purple Noon, is far superior, and I love The Talented Mr. Ripley. I think that movie's amazing, but again, Alain Delon, directed by René Clément, you can't beat it. It's so cool. Delon's performance is amazing. According to Jude Law, I think I've said this before, it's like more book accurate, and not that I care about that, but it's just interesting because it does go different routes in the film when it comes to some of the characters than The Talented Mr. Ripley, especially with the opening. The opening is so different to The Talented Mr. Ripley. Where we get to towards the end is very similar, but even the ending of this film is amazing. It's so interesting. It might even be the thumbnail to this video, because yeah, this is one of my favorite films I've seen this year, period. I love this film. Again, Alain Delon is becoming one of my favorite actors of all time. If you want to recommend a few of his movies to me, that would be greatly appreciated, because I think he's fantastic. Just the way that the sea looks, the characters look, the costume is, the locations they shot on, all surrounding these fascinating characters. And yeah, if you've seen The Talented Mr. Ripley, you kind of know what's going to happen, but I don't know, it's so engrossing. And yeah, Alain Delon is so good in this movie. He's so amazing as Tom Ripley. He absolutely chews up the scenery, and allegedly it was like a totally different role to anything he'd taken on prior. So really interesting that. But yeah, no, Plan Soleil, Purple Noon, whatever you want to call it, an absolute diehard recommendation of mine. I'll always say it's one of my favorite films to ever come from the country of France. I adore this movie. Yeah, next I'm going to talk about a director who gets referenced loads on the podcast, Francois Truffaut. We actually haven't covered any of his films yet, but obviously his interview with Hitchcock, and we've done a load of Hitchcock films, gets referenced all the time. And yeah, The 400 Blows is so interesting. The character of Antoine Doinel is a fascinating character who kind of epitomizes the work of Truffaut, because he did a bunch of films and short films about that character, played by Jean-Pierre Liaud. Yeah, Antoine Doinel is such an interesting character, and here we get him as a child. And yeah, it's safe to say his upbringing's not enjoyable. The poor lad. Yeah, it's like a really dark Oliver Twist is how I'd describe it. Or like I think I said on my letterbox, it's like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but if you just get caught straight away and then you get like really severely punished. It's a dark film, it's safe to say, about a child who doesn't necessarily have the easiest of times. And yeah, it shapes Antoine Doinel as a character, and then we get a bunch of films afterwards which are all also great, it's safe to say. And yeah, Truffaut's work is amazing. He's an amazing director, and I'm sure we will cover some of his work on the podcast at some stage next year, because yeah, probably will be The 400 Blows, but we'll see how it goes. He is an amazing director, and Antoine Doinel is an amazing character, and I couldn't recommend it enough. We're down to 2, and yeah, if you want to talk about literally one of the best thrillers ever made, Henry Georges Clouzot's Wages of Fear has to get mentioned. I'm going to kind of leave it short and sweet with this one by just saying the plot. 2 groups of 2 must drive 2 trucks full of explosives from point A to point B. If they so much as hit a pothole, the truck blows up and they die. Yeah, it's a tense movie, it's safe to say. Yeah, bet y'all didn't expect a musical to be number 1 on the list. It's Umbrellas of Cherbourg, of course it is. Beautiful movie, one of the most beautiful movies ever made. It's got one of the most emotional endings. It's so beautifully shot. The colors in this film, the performances in this film, just the concept itself, where like every line of dialogue, like every single word is sang, is so cool, genuinely cool. And yeah, the gas station, petrol station, whatever, service station scene. But yeah, I'm really going to get into a few Jacques Demy films anyway in the meantime, and I'm not really a musical guy, so for that to be one of my favorite films of all time might say a little bit just how fantastic and amazing the film is. But yeah, it is like literally so amazing, and I couldn't recommend it enough. And yes, that is the 12 classic French films I would recommend everybody see. And yeah, recommend a few to me if you wouldn't mind. Tell me what I missed out on, and tell me what you think of the films that I did mention. And of course, as I said, like, subscribe, and give us whatever lists you also want to see in the comment section below. Thank you so much, and yeah, I'll see you this week for The Third Man. That'll be great. Yeah, I love that film. So yeah, see you then this Friday, The Third Man.